You know, sometimes the best business case studies aren't found in textbooks, they're hidden in stories. And today we've got a great one. It's a fantastic tale about what happens when a rigid, top down corporate policy goes head to head with on the ground reality and a little bit of human genius. So, our story is told from the perspective of two junior engineers at a gas plant. To the big bosses, they were just clerks. But to the Mexican laborers doing the hard work, they were the company. They were the ones who handed out the cash. They were, for all intents and purposes, Señor Payroll. All right, let's set the scene. Before all the drama started, things at this plant were running pretty smoothly. It wasn't because of some brilliant corporate strategy, but because of a delicate, informal system. A system that actually worked because it was built around the people doing the work. And at the very heart of this operation, you had the stokers. Now, these weren't just any workers. The story calls them aristocrats. These were proud men doing incredibly difficult Herculean work with a ton of skill. The bottom line, they were absolutely irreplaceable. Okay, and here's the fundamental problem, the mismatch at the center of our story. Company policy was simple. You get paid twice a month. But for the stokers, that was just absurd. In their culture, you earn money, you spend money. The idea of holding on to cash for 2 whole weeks, that was for misers. It just didn't compute with their reality. So what do? Well, our engineers, Señor Payroll, they came up with a really clever, common-sense solution. They found a little bit of wiggle room in the company rules, and they started giving the stokers small pay advances every few days. This kept everybody happy. The stokers got their cash when they needed it, the coal kept moving, and the plant kept humming along. It was a perfect, unofficial system. And then you know how this goes. Just when everything is working perfectly, a memo arrives. A new rule from downtown sent by people in an office hundreds of miles away who had no idea they were about to drop a bomb on this finely tuned little ecosystem. And there it is, cold, corporate, absolute. No advance, except in a case of genuine emergency. It's the kind of rule designed by a committee to prevent abuse, but what it really did was throw a wrench into the whole works. The simple, effective system they had, officially dead. So the first stoker to see this new rule, a guy named Juan Garcia, he just looks at it and asks the most perfect, simple question. This phrase, genuine emergency, what does that even mean? What is a genuine emergency? And of course, the engineers had no good answer. And what happened next? Well, it turned into this brilliant, escalating duel. On one side, you have the rigid, faceless rules from downtown. And on the other, you have the incredible ingenuity of the stokers, who, let's be honest, just wanted to get paid. It really became this classic tit for tat. The company would issue a rule, and the stokers would find a clever workaround. So the company would fire back with an even tougher rule, and the stokers would find an even more creative loophole. It was a masterclass in bending the rules without breaking them. So what was the stokers' first move? Oh, it was genius. They took that vague corporate phrase, genuine emergency, and they weaponized it. All of a sudden, Juan Garcia's wife was gravely ill. Pete Mendoza's mother was on her deathbed. A veritable epidemic of emergencies swept the plant, and according to the company's own rule, every single one had to be honored with a pay advance. Well, it didn't take long for downtown to catch on. A new memo came down, no exceptions, period. But they left one tiny, crucial loophole. See, any employee who quit had to be paid their final wages in full immediately. So, what do you think the stokers did? They started quitting every few days. Then they just show up the next morning, ready to be rehired for their absolutely essential jobs. You can just imagine the paperwork chaos this was causing. The head office was furious. So they decided, okay, that's it. We are going to end this game, once and for all, with a rule that they thought was completely unbeatable. And there it is, the checkmate, the 30-day rule. Now, if a stoker quit to get paid, he couldn't come back for a whole month. This was a devastating blow. It looked like the company had finally officially won. Yeah, the game really seemed to be over. The stokers all resigned, they got their pay, they shook hands with the engineers, and they left. It must have been a pretty somber day at the plant. How could they possibly come back from this? But the next morning, there they were, all lined up at the hiring gate. The engineer sees Juan Garcia and says, "Juan, I told you come back in 30 days. And without even blinking, the man replies, "There is some mistake, senor. I am Manuel Hernandez. This was their final, beautiful checkmate move. I mean, what do you do in that situation? The man you know as Juan Garcia is standing right in front of you telling you he's Manuel Hernandez. Are you going to argue with a man about his own name? Or are you going to hire the irreplaceable, skilled stoker you desperately need? They chose common sense. They hired him. And it just cascaded from there. Pretty soon, they were hiring a guy named Carrera, who looked an awful lot like Gonzalez, and another guy named Smith, who was a dead ringer for Ayala. Within a week, the payroll read like a history of Latin America. They had Villa, Bolivar, Batista. The paperwork was perfect, but the reality was just a complete, hilarious farce. Finally, the engineers just threw up their hands, went to the superintendent, and laid out the whole ridiculous story. And the superintendent, he didn't get mad. He didn't launch an investigation. He just listened, trying not to crack a smile, and then said two perfect words: damned nonsense. And with that one little explosion of managerial common sense, the entire war was over. The next day, the memos came down. The rules were gone. The stokers got their real names back, and more importantly, they got their pay advances back. Reality had won. It's such a great story, right? But it's way more than just a funny anecdote about outsmarting the boss. It's actually a powerful lesson in management, in culture, and in the very real limits of corporate policy. So what can we take away from this? Well, the lessons are crystal clear. First, that this idea of a one-size-fits-all corporate policy almost always breaks when it hits local reality. Second, you have to empower your people on the ground, your Señor Payrolls, to be flexible. It's absolutely critical. And finally, you have to remember there are human beings behind the spreadsheets. The stokers weren't trying to abuse the system, they were just trying to make it work for their lives. And that really brings us to the final point. This whole mess could have been avoided with just a little bit of empathy from the start. That superintendent's damn nonsense was a victory for common sense over bureaucracy. So that leaves a question for you. Where in your world, at your job, in your life, is there a pointless rule just waiting to be defeated by a little bit of human understanding?